Welcome back to Morning Glory. It is 6:49. I'm with Rafe Heydel-Mankoo here. We've got lots to talk about in the morning papers this morning. Just a little aside, Rafe, from all the news this morning. I've seen this as well that's just come out from last night, actually, from the BBC's political correspondent at City Hall in Sadiq Khan's neighbourhood. The company which gifted the Mayor of London £3,000 worth of Taylor Swift tickets, a company called LS Events, has a contract to organise this weekend's Diwali and next year's St Patrick's Day events for City Hall, despite the fact that in City Hall's own guidance it says particular caution should be taken where any gift and or hospitality is offered from any company that holds a contract with the Greater London Assembly.
Well, what a surprise is how blatant all of this stuff is. I mean, clearly, and someone in the Assembly must have known of this connection. It's so obvious, and how can they go ahead? I noticed no funding for a St George's Day parade there.
No, but St Patrick's, you're fine. Absolutely no problem at all. Let's talk about slavery reparation, because Keir Starmer, as we said yesterday, was on his way to Samoa. He's probably there now, but he said on the plane, apparently, to reporters as he was flying there, on the question of which way we're facing on reparations, he says, I think we should be facing forward. Well, that's encouraging. He then says, I've talked to a lot of our colleagues in the Commonwealth family and they're facing real challenges on things like climate in the here and now, and in all the conversations I've had with them, what they're most interested in is can we help them work with international institutions and financial institutions on the sorts of packages they need right now in relation to the challenges they're facing. Sounds very Keir Starmer-ish, but basically he's saying we're not going to even consider the reparations that are being asked for by some Caribbean nations, including Barbados.
Yeah, make no mistake, if Britain had the money, Labour would definitely be paying reparations, especially when you've got David Mastermind Lammy as Foreign Secretary. But of course, the reality is it will be political suicide for Labour to do this, right? You can't remove people's winter fuel allowance and then start forking out billions over to middle-income countries in the Caribbean.
To some perfectly decently run countries, or were decently run countries, which have got big tourism trade and big, amounts of money coming into the countries from foreign fields. So, yeah, I mean, but my worry about Keir Starmer is whenever he says, I'm definitely not going to do something, he always ends up doing it. And that's the trouble.
Well, the thing is, of course, my thing is that there's a wider thing here. You know, you've seen how he's been taking down portraits, even now, of William Shakespeare.
The latest, yes.
I mean, so the degree to which we're getting the messaging that, Britain has a past it should be ashamed of. Elizabeth I now is, persona non grata. So is Sir Walter Raleigh. I mean, they absolutely loathe Britain's past and our history. And so, of course they're sympathetic to the reparations campaign. But, of course, they have reform nipping at their heels in so many constituencies, despite their big majority. If they ever even considered going along with reparations, maybe even making an apology, I think, reform will overtake Labour in many of those marginal constituencies.
Absolutely, no question at all. Front page of the Daily Mail, fury over Reeves' raid on private sector pensions. This is a real scandal, actually, which is going to probably pick up and become a massive story as we get closer to the budget on the 30th of October. Labour basically saying that we are going to come after you if you've got a private pension, but if you've got a public sector pension, don't worry, we won't be touching it. It's completely, I mean, talk about two-tier everything, two-tier pensions now. Yeah,
well, it just goes to show this is old Labour, isn't it? Protect the public service and a war on the private sector completely. It's a get-out-of-jail-free card for the public sector. Public sector pensions are so generous and so gold-plated, and once again, they're being protected.
And these are things that are never mentioned when there are strikes, when the nurses go on strike and they talk about their poor conditions, when the doctors go on strike and talk about their poor conditions. They never mention how great their pensions are.
Civil servants, doctors and teachers have the most generous of pay rises, and it says here that in many cases, for every £1 someone pays into a public sector pay pension, they get 6 times more money out of it. And all that's going to happen here is that because employers are going to have to pay more national insurance on these pension contributions, and it means that those people who are paying above the minimum are going. Those employers are going to lower their pension contributions, and it's going to impact pay rises. They're going to be less willing to increase pay rises because they have to make up the cost of all of this.
And even worse than that, we learned this week as well that the national insurance rise that they're going to give to companies, which means that every single company in this country will have to pay more in national insurance for every employee that they've got. They're going to refund every single public sector employee, for example, the NHS, because of course they employ millions of people. Every single penny that they will have to pay extra in national insurance will be refunded to them by the government, i.e. by us.
Yeah, well, it just reminds me of the complete mess they made of the VAT on public schools, where, of course, they can retroactively claim back for 10 years' worth and end up costing people more. Plus, putting people back into the school section.
Yeah.
But it says here, someone earning £35,000 today, whose salary rises by 2% a year, would be £177,000 worse off after 35 years if their employers cut their pensions from 8% to the minimum 3%.
Yeah. Absolutely ridiculous. Disgusting. Let's talk about the right to strike, because Angela Rayner, in amongst all of the other things that she's doing, wants to give the unions not only the capability to go on strike if only 2% of their members actually want to, she's also now saying you should be allowed to strike for twice as long as you otherwise were, because we're going to give you even more rights, and you can basically have wildcat unofficial strikes as many times as you like in any given year.
Yeah, as we were just saying, yeah,
doesn't sound like a great idea.
Yeah, another war on businesses. You know, with these crazy raft of employment rights that are now coming in.
Yeah,
and they'll be able to strike even if most members don't vote for action. And they'll be able to bargain with employers even if just 2% of staff are members, you know. And these unofficial wildcat walkouts are a real problem because they don't give companies time to prepare and make contingency arrangements as they do if they knew that a strike was coming. Yeah, and giving them a year-long mandate to strike instead of the usual 6-month window. I mean, it's as they said here, it's, you know, it could cost companies almost £5 billion a year through all of these reforms. Quite crazy.
Quite ridiculous. Let's talk about Geoff Capes, a man who perhaps younger listeners and viewers might not know, but who was kind of Mr. Strongman, I think, for most of us. I mean, you're not quite as old as I am. He died yesterday, aged 75. He was the Commonwealth double gold medalist and 2 times voted, a winner of the world's strongest man competitions, and he still holds the UK shot put record that he broke in 1980. He was one of those guys who was a sort of icon, a former policeman, you know, when police actually was scary, you know, because he could lift you up off the ground and literally throw you into the paddy wagon, you know, and budgie breeder as well. What a character.
Yeah. I mean, he was a giant, literally, of you know, anybody who's over 45.
Yeah.
You know, that was part of your childhood, and it became he became synonymous. Just saying you're a Geoff Capes means you're a strong person.
Right.
He was loved by children. He was feared by telephone books. He was so, you know, that was his great thing, was to tear telephone books up on television and so forth. And, you know, became a friend of the royal family. I mean, people have to remember, you know, we only had a couple of TV channels back then, 3 or 4 channels, and the world's strongest man was a national event. Everybody watched this.
Yes.
And to have our guy
Absolutely.
there. And the thing is, he is still the record holder for the shot put.
Yeah.
He set in 1980.
Incredible.
For that record still to stand is quite
And he
amazing.
didn't need steroids, he didn't need to be trained by the Russians. You know, there's a great picture of him in several of the papers today with Princess Diana, Prince Charles, the Queen and the Queen Mother. It's in the Mirror on page 5. Just sort of, they're laughing uproariously as he's sort of entertaining them because he's wearing a kilt. He's presumably up at the Braemar Highland Games.
Tossing the caber and
throwing the hammer and all the rest of it. And also takes you back to that kind of period when you could do things like put Linda Lusardi, who was a former Page 3 girl, on your shoulder and carry her around. And this is a picture from 1991. And it's just, I mean, I hate to sound like an old git, but I mean, it was just a much simpler time,
much simpler, much happier, much more innocent.
There was nobody going, what's he doing? Why is he carrying that woman around on his shoulders? Well, because he can. That's what he's doing. And he was a lovely guy. I met him a few times. And he was the sort of guy that if you went to interview him, you always ended up in the pub. You know, he just always wanted a pint of beer, no matter how fit he was. He never looked like he was sort of ripped. He didn't look like one of those characters that you now see in Mr. Universe.
Well, none of those world's strongest men are ripped.
Well, no. But you know, he looked like an ordinary guy. He was probably a bit overweight, but incredibly strong. Well, you know, what he did, he ate 12,000 calories a day to keep up his strength and stamina, but he really was a gentle giant. That's why, you know, it's so surprising. You know, animal lover, you would have thought maybe he'd have a Great Dane or a St. Bernard. No, budgerigars. Of all the things in the world, I think it's quite wonderful. Exactly right. Final story to talk about, I suppose, still one of the big stories of the week, the whole Kaaba story where a police officer yesterday was still in hiding, it has to be said, because, of course, he's got a £10,000 bounty on his head for shooting Chris Kaaba dead 2 years ago. The BBC have been in the dock today because they apparently wrote a story in which they said the black community has been traumatised by the appalling racism of the Metropolitan Police. Yeah, the BBC spouting fake news. You know, one person in the black community said that people were being traumatised. That's not evidence of a community being traumatised. Right. I'm terribly sorry. It has got to the state now where the BBC's tweet of this article became fact-checked and community noted by the Twitter followers. Yes.
and then the BBC turned off their replies to this article.
And have you seen, I don't know whether you have, I put on the BBC News the other night just to see what was going on for a good laugh. They've actually got a sort of a Clive Myrie sort of promo before the news in which it says, "We've earned your trust. It doesn't come easy. You trust us, and we know that you are looking to us to tell you the truth. The truth comes at a price." And you're going, sorry? I mean, are you joking? The truth does not come out of the BBC anymore, I'm afraid.
No, it just goes to show you the state of all of our institutions, because look at the speed with which the government tried to sort of, apologise to the black community.
Right.
You know,
I
now,
know. So they can't still saying sorry.
Corbyn, Khan, Abbott, the moment
they're
that
all
this
going to
happened,
go, and we've got to go as well. We've got to go as well. Sorry, I'm Mike Graham. Thank you, Rafe. We'll be back after this.